In this composition lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more than usual about what to do when you first get to a place and how to find the best compositions. Now this lighthouse here is one of my favorites to photograph. This is Scituate Light on the coast of Massachusetts, about, I don't know, half an hour or 40 minutes south of Boston. And what I love about this lighthouse is that the facets in it make sure that regardless of what time of day it is, you've got some dimensional structure from the light. The sun is never exactly overhead this lighthouse. So what that means is there's going to be these sides, at least three you're going to see at any one time, where you get these three different shades from white to dark gray that give it dimension. That's one of the things I love about photographing this lighthouse. So I took this shot just as I arrived. This is the parking lot side of the shot, and you can see we have nice cloudscapes, but there was just something about it that wasn't working. And also, having the bright side of the lighthouse on the right kind of pushes you off to the right and makes you want to leave the image. So I started walking around. I walked around the other side of the lighthouse to the kind of the beach harbor side and found this kind of lighting with even better clouds. Now, obviously this is just a scouting shot, but you can see what's going on. The clouds are much more dramatic. We've got the light here. And what that does is you've got the clouds leading you in. You've got these lines of clouds coming in. You hit this white, which is the brightest part of the image, but then the two different shades of gray as it gets darker start to form a slight visual block that keep you from leaving the image and recenter you back on the lighthouse. Now I realized I needed a little bit more room to work, so I took the same shot horizontally. All right, so now we're starting to get somewhere. I've got a couple little spots. There's one spot there. But now the thing is starting to come together. There's still some things that need to be done to make this work, but it's starting to come together. So let's just cut to the chase and get rid of the spots. You might as well remember that Q and A are spot removal and show the spots. I don't know how they came up with those shortcuts, but that's what they are. This is the spot removal tool right here, the little circle with the arrow in it. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Now, if I want to see the spots better, there's this one here, but are there any others hiding in here? So I can hit the A key, which is the keyboard shortcut for this visualize spots thing down on the bottom. And still not seeing much. Let's increase the power of the visualize spots. And here's our main spot. And yes, there are a couple that are faint. Now, as we do our edits, they will probably become more prominent. So let's just cut to the chase. There's actually a bunch of them here. I want to make the spot removal tool just bigger than the circle itself. Got one there, got one there. There's one hiding in the clouds. If you see that perfect circle, by the way, it's a spot. Even though it's very subtle. As we add contrast and maybe some dehaze, those things will show up more. Now this one, like right here, I can't tell if that's a spot. So you can hit the A key. In fact, let's zoom in. Let's go to 50%. Zoom into that side of the lighthouse there. Yeah, this apparently is not a spot. This definitely is a spot. Here's the danger, though. I'm going to make the spot removal tool even a little smaller. If you go with heal, as we do with most of our spots, the problem is it's right up against this line. So let's see what happens. Let's click on it. And you see it picks a bad spot. So let's come down here. Let's come down over here, actually. But it doesn't like, because there's a feather involved, it's picking up some of the line and distorting it. You don't see it that badly here, but if you look real close, let's go to 100%. You can see that little bit of line that it's picking up. That's not good. So let's undo that. Let's make our spot tool a little smaller. We're going to draw around it a little bit. But what I'm going to do, instead of using heal, I'm going to use clone, because clone doesn't pick up as much of that feather. In fact, I'm even going to turn the feather down. And you can see it's a very subtle spot. But by doing that, I can then pick up where it's going to go, but it's not going to pick up that line. It doesn't seem to search out as far. That looks a lot better. So now if we hit Q and A, yes, you can see now it's a very clean spot removal. And as we saw as we looked in closer, even though this kind of it looked like a spot, it turned out not. There's something right here also. This thing up here. Let's see. Actually, that is a spot. So let's get rid of this one as well. Then just a little bit bigger. Well, again, let's zoom in a bit. There it is right here. It's one of those things you can barely tell that it's a spot. When you hit the A key, though, you can see there's a slight darkening there. So we'll make it just bigger than the spot. And I'll turn it back to heal because that does kind of use more of a texture thing rather than an exact copy, and it blends in a little bit better. Okay. All right, so I think we've gotten rid of our spots now. Now let's go ahead and do some adjustments to the image with adding some more structure to it, some more presence. Highlight shadows. Actually, they look pretty good. Let's cut right down to texture. Let's add some texture. Let's add some clarity. And we obviously need some vibrance and saturation. Now, as we bring the saturation up, as often happens, the blue, in my opinion, seems to go a little too cyan. So we're going to fix that as well. I'm going to open up the shadows because I want a little more light in the top of the lighthouse. So let's open up the shadows a bit. That looks a lot better. So in order to fix the sky, let's come down to HSL, Hue, Saturation, Luminance. I'm going to click on the hue, get our button, and again, as I click and push up, that makes it bluer to purple, that makes it to cyan. I generally find that something around 12 is pretty common to neutralize that sky to kind of more the blue we're looking for. I'm also going to darken it a little bit. Let's come over to Luminance. Let's darken that just a smidge. So what else? Well, there's too much surrounding the lighthouse for one. We don't need all this stuff. The lighthouse is too small in the frame. If you look at all of this space around it, you're not focused on it. There's a tendency to drift away. We need to make the lighthouse more prominent. So I'm going to do that two ways. First, I'm going to get a brush. Auto mask is turned on. Again, down here, I'm going to hit O to turn on the overlay. I want to bring up a little more color and contrast and structure in here. So I'm going to select the top of the lighthouse. All of this structure here. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And this is one of those places where if it goes a little bit outside the lines, it's really okay. It's not going to hurt anything. I want to bring out some of that green that is showing up. And yeah, we're not worried about the railing, just the green parts. Okay, so I hit O to toggle that off. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit. Let's brighten it up a little. Let's add saturation. Again, I want that green to come up. There we go, it's starting to come up. Let's add some clarity to that. And let's add a little dehaze because that'll add a little extra. And as we do that, that darkens it again. So let's brighten that up. Much better. So now we can kind of really see that green that's going on there. And let's hit done. So I mentioned there's too much stuff beyond the lighthouse. The lighthouse is too small in the frame. We really need to make the lighthouse the primary subject in this. And as I look at this is one of those subjects that I think is perfect as a square. This is screaming square crop to me. So I'm going to go up to the crop tool, choose 1:1, and I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Again, we want the lighthouse to be the star. I even come up, and I'm going to put the lighthouse slightly off to one side. I think about, you know what? Let's put the lightning rod right on our golden ratio line. Is that too much? I actually think it is. I think it needs to be, it's just slightly off center. Something about like that. And that's getting really close. I think we're getting close to done here. Two more things I want to do though. I do want to add more structure to the clouds. And I could use the dehaze, but I'm going to bring up my old friend here. Again, if you don't have this, you really want to get yourself a copy of Nik's filters. So I'm going to edit in Nik's Viveza 2 because just what it does for skies, for bringing out the structure of clouds, just does it so much easier and so much better than both Lightroom and Photoshop can do. Yes, you can do it in Photoshop, but it just takes so much more work than just using the plugin, because watch what's going to happen. Here's our image loaded into Viveza. This is the before-after slider. I'm just going to move this off to one side for now. And up in the menu, I'm going to add a bunch of structure. And just right there, look what it does for that sky. If I undo that, look, here's where we started. Just bringing that up. Look at how it defines those clouds so much better. I'm also going to, I think I want to darken up the clouds a little bit. So let's get a brush, a control point rather. I'm going to make it really big. And let's bring down the brightness a little bit. That's making the blue look realer. Also, it's creating a gradation down the image where you can see it's going a little cyan here again. Let's get another control point down here. We'll make that big. We'll make this kind of the bottom right corner. And let's add a little blue to this to take away some of that cyan. And I'm going to add, while I'm here, I'm going to add more structure in there. Oh, look at that. In fact, let's come up here. Let's add some structure in here again. And I want to bring out the differences on the clouds here. So one more structure adjustment right here. Let's bring up the structure. And you can see I could take it to the extreme. It gets kind of crazy. But you see how it just adds the separation. Kind of like wearing super polarized sunglasses. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Rather than create another point, I'm just going to hold down the Alt key, which you see when you put your cursor over this dot, turns to a plus. That allows me to drag it in. So I'm going to drag it there, and I also want another one down here. I also don't like the blue here. It needs a little more blue. There we go. Actually, I'm going to move this into the blue, and I'm going to darken that a little bit too, but it needs a little more saturation. There we go. And I think one last little bit of structure on this series of clouds on the bottom. I see some potential here for bringing that out. We'll add a bunch of saturation there. Let's add some contrast too. All right. Looking so much better. I think I might want to take a little bit more off the top, but let's take a look with our before-after slider. Let's drag this over and look how much more pop there is to the image. It really is like really super polarizing your image. It gets rid of all the distractions, makes those clouds and sky just completely pop. So I'm going to hit save. And by the way, when you do this kind of somewhat extreme color contrast change, you are going to add some noise and grain up into the sky. In fact, let's zoom in and we can see some of that grain. So fortunately, if you get the Nik filters, there's also, if we come up to photo, edit in, there's Nik Define. And what Define is a noise reduction program, and I find 99% of the time I just use it in its automatic settings. It loads up the image. It will go ahead and analyze it. Down here in the navigator, I'm just going to go up to the top of the Lighthouse so we can see as it does its magic. You'll see it's analyzing over here. Here's the before and here's the after. So let's see what it does for us in getting rid of that noise. And voila, look at that. Isn't that amazing? Now, when you do sharpening on an image, what it does is it does create this slight halo. And when you have to decide is it going to show up in your image? Now, we're looking at the image here at 100%. And if you haven't heard me talk about this before, looking at an image at 100% on your computer is not what you're looking at in a print. Because I'm working on a 27-inch iMac. The actual screen resolution is 109 dots per inch. I'm going to print it at least twice that. So if I really want to judge my images, what I need to do as I bring this back is I need to look at it at 50%. So here we are at 50%, and you can see as we scroll around, those little halos that you see at 100%, they disappear. So what that means is those halos are not going to show up on a print. That's the beauty of it. Now, if you get to the point where at 50% you see your halos, that's a subject for another day. I can show you how to get rid of those in Photoshop. So let's zoom out. And that's looking, actually that's looking pretty stunning. I think I want to come in a little bit, just a smidge, not much. Just want to take a little off the top. And depending on what I was going to do with a framing, if I'm going to put this in a frame with a matte, I would have left it alone because the matte is going to do a little of that crop for you. Now, as I stare at this image, I'm looking at it. Now I'm thinking, you know what? The square is a little bit too restrictive. It needs some more room on the left-hand side to give your eye sort of some momentum as it's coming in from the left to get to the image. The square is a little bit too stationary, too static. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to take this back into Viveza, but first I have to kind of uncrop. Here we go. Here's our last raw file. I need some more room. So let's unclick off the one-to-one. Let's go ahead and add some more all around it. We're going to crop it, but by doing this, we'll have a lot more to deal with and flexibility with our cropping. So this is what I'm going to send into Viveza. Let's do that again. Also, and this is one of the benefits of getting up, taking a walk, or even coming back the next day when you're doing an image edit. Because now as I'm looking at it, yes, I'm going to darken the sky, but it's a little too cool for me. I think maybe the lighthouse needs a little bit of warmth as well. So let's send this one into Viveza. So photo edit in Viveza 2. All right, so I broke one of my own rules, just so you know. Always give yourself more room to play. And that goes for out in the field when you're shooting and when you're sending stuff into something like Viveza, because you can always crop, but you can't uncrop it. Okay, so let's add a bunch of structure. Oh, I love how structure works in Viveza. I'm going to bring down the brightness of the blues. Let's get a big brush, big control point here. I'm going to make it bigger by dragging this out. And by the way, it's only going to affect things that match that blue. So let's add some structure. And I'm going to make it a little bluer, a little more towards the blue, and a little bit darker. That's looking better. And now on the bottom part of the image, you can see the blue has still kind of got that little cyan feel to it. So let's click over in here. In this case, cyan is green, so let's pull some of the green out. Ah, that's looking better. Let's add some structure in here, and we'll take that Alt, click on the button again, click on the button, hold down the Alt key, it turns to a plus, and oh, look how much better that blue looks. I think this cloud could be a little bit brighter, so let's get one right in here. Let's brighten up that cloud a little bit. Just a little bit of bright. It's actually gone maybe a little too blue also. So let's take a little of the blue out. In fact, let's not do that. Let's just take some of the saturation out. There we go. All right. On the blue, let's see. Do I still see this one? I think I want it even a little darker. Let's see. Let's bring that down. And strangely enough, I'm going to pull a little saturation out of that. I don't want the blue to become so powerful that it takes away from the lighthouse. Now, I had mentioned warming up the lighthouse a little bit because, again, think about your colors. Cool colors recede. The blues go to the background. Warm colors come closer to you. So let's put a control point on here, and we can just warm it up. Let's warm it up a little bit. Oh, yes. Notice how just that little bit of warmth is creating so much more separation from the back because you have the warm color coming towards you with the blue color receding. I think that was the answer. And let's see if it needs one up in here too. We'll put one up in here. Let's see if we warm that up a bit. Going to be less of an effect. Let's add a little more saturation in that green while we're at it. Ah, that's better. Okay. I think we're pretty much done with our Viveza edit with our bigger crop. Strangely enough, I think this is going to end up like an 8x10. And much as I usually hate 8x10s, this one actually might be an answer. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I think we're done. You know what? I want to separate these bricks out a little more too. Let's add some structure in here. Yeah, you see what that does is it gives some definition in the lines of the bricks. Now we're done. So let's hit save. Okay, now one last thing before we do our final crop and maybe a little vignette on here is, again, an edit that adds as much contrast to this does create some grain, as we'll see. You can see up above the lighthouse. So I'm going to take advantage of Nick's other filter, Define 2, which is a noise reduction filter. And again, the thing I love about it is, really, it can be pretty much automatic. I rarely find myself changing any of the settings here. So let's let it do its magic. I'm going to go down here to the navigator and look right above the top of the lighthouse with the lightning rod. Over in here, it says it's analyzing. I'm just going to let it do the automatic method and do its magic. And I find that most of the times that really does work best. And there we go. And look at how amazing that is, how much that cleaned that up. And again, as I mentioned before about the little bit of halo at 100%, pretty meaningless as far as a print goes when you have something that small. All right, and here look how beautiful, how clean that sky looks now. Okay, so what's the last thing? All right, let's revisit our crop. Let's click on the crop, and as loath as I usually are to do it, at 8x10. Let's bring it down a little bit. Again, we want the lighthouse to be the star here. Do I want it exactly on the right third line of the golden ratio? Actually, in this case, slightly off. I'm going to push it in a little bit more. And what you can see is happening is, I'm going to come up from the bottom as well. What you can see is happening is that now your eye has more room from the left to come into the lighthouse. And again, if I was going to print this, I'd give myself a little bit of extra room, because if it's going to get a matte, which for me an 8x10 always will, a square not always, but an 8x10 will, and there needs to be a little bit of room because the matte's going to do a little bit of a crop as well. So I would probably print that. So let's hit enter. Last thing I want to do is I'm going to put my vignette on this one. So come to effects. I'm going to vignette the whole thing. Let's see, do I want it round like that, or do I want it a little more square? So let's change the roundness a bit. I think maybe something more like that. We'll feather it out and then back off on the amount. Back to our about 12, 11, even 8. 8's fine for this one. And again, doesn't even look like I did anything, right? But turn the switch on and off and you can see it just does that slight bit of darkening that helps you get back into the image. And I think that's our final image. So let's take one more step through the whole journey of arriving at the place and deciding what to do. When you arrive at a place, the best thing to do is to walk around, see what the light is doing, look at the compositions. When I arrived here and saw this, I thought, oh, what great cloudscapes today. The light is great because we have the bright side, the facets of this lighthouse, which I love so much, always make it structural regardless of where the sun is. However, again, as I mentioned, the white on this side was a distraction because you go right here, and then from here, there's nothing stopping you on the right from leaving the image. So I thought it'd be better if it was on the other side, because then you'd have the dark side to stop you from leaving. So I walked around the other side of the lighthouse and I saw this. Yes, it's just a scouting shot, but now with the light on this side, we have the dark, and that stops you from leaving the frame. So I reshot it, I recomposed it, and added some color in it. This is from the other side, shot horizontally. Yeah, we still have spots and stuff like that. So the next step was to go in and fix that stuff. And I kind of decided, yeah, this is going to be good as a square. And it's okay. It does work as a square. This would make a nice canvas print, a canvas square, because it is very simple, single subject. However, as I stood here looking at it, or sat here looking at it, I felt it was maybe a little too static. It could use a little more motion, and to add that motion, it needed a little more room on the left-hand side, because you have all these clouds giving you the lines right to the lighthouse, but there wasn't enough kind of ramp-up speed to get you there. I thought it needed a little more on the left side. So I took the whole thing back into Viveza, re-edited it as an 8x10. This is actually an 8x10 shape. Actually, this is more than an 8x10 shape. Because I wanted some more room for cropping. So this is good for cropping because if you're going to matte this in a frame, the matte is going to take off a certain amount. So you want to have a little extra. But the final 8x10 crop of what it would look like in the print is this. And I like this the best, I think. The square works okay, but I like having a little bit more room on the left-hand side because it creates a little more motion. And with the crop, you don't have too much sky around the image. It really works for me. Again, the square is fine. Depending on how it's going to be printed, it's equally as good. I just like the little bit added motion that creating an 8x10 shape gave from here. Honestly, as I look at it even closer, I'd actually probably prefer this a little bit somewhere in between an 8x10 and a square. Maybe take a little bit more off the left, but that does require a custom framing or a custom mat. So the beauty of this is it's going to fit in a standard frame, and I can live with that. But when you consider this is what we started with, this is what we saw when we first arrived at the lighthouse, shooting it horizontally and changing it over, a vast difference, a beautiful shot, beautiful sky, and the beautiful sculptural feel of this lighthouse out in the landscape.